Hey, everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name's Dave Bailey, and this is Grief and Grace. Grief is the universal human response to the experience of loss, whatever that loss is. It might be the loss of someone you love, the loss of a job, the loss of hope, the loss of whatever. And the universal response that we have to that is grief. And yet it's something that we often don't have vocabulary to express or permission to speak of. And so this Facebook Live is about creating a space where we can learn more about and talk about grief in all of its multifaceted ways. And I am totally stoked to have as my guest tonight Scott Stabile. We've been trying to put this together for 6 months, and tonight's the night. I think we're yeah, exactly. I think we're in the right place, the right time, for the right reason, with the right people here, and I'm looking forward to all of the good things that will come out of this conversation tonight. Scott's the author of the book Big Love, The Power of Living with a Wide Open Heart, and I read Big Love at a critical juncture in my life, and it literally helped salvage my soul and my sanity during a time when I was helping people with their grief, and yet my own grief was crushing me. And I'm on my, I think, 4th or 5th reading of it, so that tells you what I think of it. And if you know someone that could benefit from the ideas we're going to be talking about tonight, why don't you go ahead and tag them in the comments. They'll get a notification. They can come join us. And if you have a question or a comment or something that you'd like Scott to address, just put it in the comments, and we'll take some time to deal with as many of those as we can before we end the show. So, Scott Stabile.
Yes, sir. Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here, and I'm grateful for your patience with me making this happen. Thank you.
Yes. No, I think we both have a great deal of confidence in the universe that things will, if we listen, things will unfold at the right time in the right place.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. And lots of changes in your life over the last pandemic months.
Yeah, I mean, lots of changes in a lot of lives probably, but yeah, I've been fairly nomadic through the summer. I was spending a lot of time actually just on the road, camping and out west and in nature, and now I'm in a cabin in Santa Fe with one of my dearest friends and his little pooch Bella, who's this lovely little French bulldog. Yeah, so in a way uprooted, but intentionally so. And
Yes.
it feels good planning to spend the winter here. I really fell in love with this part of the country. The high desert of Santa Fe is just really beautiful and magical and full of, for me, this really cradling energy, kind of very feminine, like, it's all okay, it's all okay, you're okay. Kind of
That
being
is so
pet
cool.
and stroked.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
feeling good.
you've got the Dave Letterman beard going that
Oh my God, the day. Wow, are we at that point?
that'll help
Someone called
you.
me Santa. Now you're calling me Dave Letterman. And I just trimmed it. It wasn't even bushier.
Well, that'll help you get through the Santa Fe winter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a trip though, because I haven't had a beard in, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And so it came in gray. You don't really know how gray it is because you don't see your beard. You don't have one
Yes.
like this. So it was a shock to the system. I even ordered some hair dye for it, and I was going to dye it. And then I'm like, you know what? Just be with it, sit with it, see how
There
it
you
feels.
go.
It's starting to feel
Well,
okay.
I believe in better living through chemicals. So,
Yeah. Oh, I never would have known. It looks very natural. So we're talking about grieving. I'm grieving the loss of my brown hair.
there you go.
That's,
So, let's start here because this is, I suppose, one of the places that was so impactful for me. You became acquainted with grief at an early age through two major events. And for those that aren't familiar with your story, can you share a little bit of it?
Sure. I mean, the first major event was when I was 14 and lost my parents. They were shot to death in Detroit, at a store that kind of farmers, not farmers, fruit market, convenience store that they owned in Detroit, and they and one of their employees were murdered one morning before store's opening hours. Um, so that, I mean, that is the biggest, most profound grief in my life, certainly. The other one I suspect you're referring to is my brother,
Yes.
which was years later. It was about 9 years later. No, more than 9 years later. Yeah, my brother Ricky, he died from heroin overdose. He had been struggling with addiction to heroin for much of his adult life, and he died at 40 years old, from his addiction, which
Yes.
sadly is something so many people in our country can relate to.
Yes.
Much more so than ever, it seems. Not
Yes.
only not only drug overdoses, but also gun violence.
Yeah.
Both of those things.
And you know that, especially coming from Detroit, sadly,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And I guess when I think about your brother's story, it's not just the end of his story, but the loss of so much of relationship throughout all of your life with him, and what you couldn't have and what you didn't have. And
yeah. In some ways, that's what I mean. I always knew my brother only through the lens of his addiction because I'm 18 years younger than he was, and he was, as far as anyone knows, he started getting involved with drugs right around 18 years old. So
wow.
my whole life experience of him when he was alive was through that lens, and it brought up a lot of rage in me because what
Yes.
what I saw, without, especially as a kid, without understanding in any way addiction and how that affects people, um, all I saw was someone making choices that were just hurting our family over and over and over again,
Yes.
balanced with the fact that I knew my brother as this like really sweet, loving being. Everybody who knew him, he was just this open-hearted, smiling soul you couldn't help but like. Um, so making sense of those two realities, and mostly resenting him
Yes.
for the hurt that I saw him bringing into our home. And I grew up with a father who was a gambling addict. So
Wow.
I was very, very aware of the harm his addiction was bringing into our home as well. And even more directly because I was living in the home with him. My brother had moved out by the time
Yes.
I was born and would come around generally when he was kind of doing okay sometimes, or not. And but with my dad, it was a daily thing of being in the presence of someone who was out of control in the choices he was making, and really being with how those choices hurt our family.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
as much as a kid can be with them, I should say, because also I was a kid,
Yes.
and you you're growing up in the environment you're growing up in, and that is the normal environment for you.
Yes.
So it's like I would go to friends' homes, and I could see in most cases like, oh, this home feels much more normal, quote unquote, than mine. It doesn't feel as dysfunctional. But also it's like my home was my home, and there was also love there, and amidst the dysfunction, and it's what you grow up with.
Yes. Yes. It creates a set of expectations. You're
Yeah,
normal.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. And so, one of the interesting ways that you have of describing those two events and all the ancillary events that went around with those, um, you talk about them as circumstances that pulled you from your center, which I thought was a fascinating way to gather that all up. What does that mean to you, that these circumstances pulled you from your center?
Sure. Well, I can reflect on that with more insight and wisdom now. I wouldn't have been able to say that for myself as a 14-year-old. But for me, when I say that, it's that I believe when I'm centered, I'm in the energy of love. When I'm centered, I'm in love and all that love invites into my life, which is compassion and kindness and forgiveness. So anything anything that pulls us out of that place for me is being pulled from my center, and we're pulled from the energy of love all the time, or the energy of groundedness all the time, through trauma, through someone being a total jerk, and suddenly we want to like put our hands around their neck. You know what I mean? It's like that's not a loving place to be. And at the same time, that's part of living life. So when I reflect on losing my parents at 14, there's no way to stay grounded and centered in that experience. And when I reflect back on that experience, I can't honestly say that the choices I made as a 14-year-old I was making consciously. Like what I did at that time was bury the pain of that loss. And I think that that is one of the things that we can do in grief. That's one of the ways to be with grief, is to like put it away. Like something in me knew as a 14-year-old, I'm not ready to look at this. I'm not ready to mourn this. I'm not ready to rage about this. So I locked it tightly away. And I would say for the first few months after my parents died, I cried a lot. That time's a big blur in my life. But after that, it was like once a year I would cry, and then I would lock it away, and then that it would build and build, and I would cry again, and then lock it away. And it wasn't until my early 20s that I felt grounded enough, trusting enough that I could handle the grief, that I was able to really mourn them in a different way, and really cry and really rage, and do the other components of grieving and mourning that I didn't really allow myself to do. But I'm so grateful that something in me, some deep inner wisdom, or outside of me, some graceful gift of spirit, was like, for now, Scott, just lock it away. We'll take care of this later when you're ready for it. You know? Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I found that part of your story so fascinating that because I deal with grieving people all the time, and I deal with people who judge themselves in their grief process all the time.
Sure.
I should be over this. It's 3 months or 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. But for you, that process was years. Like you said, 9 years. And some interesting journeys. A journey into a cult kind of experience that gave you some groundedness in that for a while or whatever. But still, lots of just putting it away and not dealing with it and running from it over and over and over and over, and then eventually you begin the work of reclaiming your center. And you used another phrase that I found fascinating. You said that the work involved integrating those experiences back into your life. And that's a huge statement that probably involves a lot of years. Can you just kind of walk us through that?
Sure. I mean, well, essentially, Dave, for me, when I even just reflect on grief, it's not through the lens of overcoming it. It's through a lens of integrating it, because in my personal experience and with others, I don't think we really overcome profound grief. We get to a place, hopefully, where we're living our lives in a way that feels more okay, more peaceful, perhaps less full of despair. But it doesn't mean that we still don't connect to those places inside of ourselves that miss the experience of having people in our lives, or a job, or a relationship, whatever the situation is that we're grieving. So we're forced to, in this reality, to integrate and move forward. It's like the sun keeps rising, days keep going on, we have choices to make for ourselves. And I feel like you mentioned how people feel shame about their grieving process, and I feel like that's one of the great disservices we can do to ourselves, is to judge the ways in which we're grieving, or to shame ourselves because of it. I don't reflect on my process of grieving my parents, or grieving my brother, or grieving a whole host of things through the notion that I did it wrong. And that's one thing I would really emphasize with people out there who may be grieving, and whose mind may want to tell them that they're doing it wrong and they should be over it. That's it's nonsense, right? These are the messages of an ego mind. These are the messages of conditioning that the world gives us, that we are supposed to move through things in a certain way, and hit five specific points along that way, and then be finished and button it up and polished, and then there's closure. I don't really know people who are experiencing grief in that way. I certainly haven't. I can still, it's about like 30, it'll be 35 years next year, since I lost my parents, and I'll still have moments where I cry and sob over the pain and sorrow of it, but that's not my day to day, and that hasn't been my day to day for a very long time. Um, so I say that, and the thing I would like to say with that is that there's always value in considering the choices we can make for ourselves that stand to create a little more peace, or a little more joy, or a little more meaning, or a little more connection in our lives. There's always value in that. Even if you're in the throes of grief, it doesn't mean that there's still not opportunity in that time for moments of real connection and joy with people. Because I think that there's another thing that can go on for people in the grieving process, which is that there's no space for joy in it, or it's not okay for me to feel joy. It's not okay for me to have moments of shared happiness with people because I'm grieving, right? I feel like we're in communal grieving in this on the planet, but in this country, we've been in communal grieving around the political climate, and the sense of division that exists in this country, and the heaviness of it, and the despair, and this pandemic is going on, and so many people are suffering, and that's very real, right? And at the same time, it's okay to be joyful. At the same time, our planet needs our joy. If it's in you to celebrate something, to celebrate yourself, that is not only okay, but beautiful and necessary. And it's not something that you need to feel guilty about. It's not something that you need to feel ashamed of. Joy is critical. Connection is critical. And any moment at a time where it can feel so dark out there, you know, let's keep ourselves open to that possibility in our reality as well.
I love that. I tend to think of it with people. I talk to people about a both and, that it's not an
Mm.
either or. It's not,
Mhm.
either I'm sad and crying or I'm joyful, and I can't experience joy in this where I'm supposed to be sad. No,
Yeah.
it's it's a both and there's just a long and wonderful way of carrying both the, I call it the mystery of grief, where you have the sadness of loss on the one side, and the wonder of joy on the other, and you carry them together, and to
Yeah.
use your word, you try to integrate them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. There was so many things you were saying. I was like, oh, I should stop him there. Oh, I should stop him there.
You can
Um,
always cut me off too, because I'll just keep going and going and going. So
I love it.
anytime.
Let me ask you this. So you have these traumatic events, and grief becomes your constant companion. And I mean, that was one of the interesting things too. I I've come to recognize that there are losses in our life that will never change. The fact the death of your parents will never change. So
Yeah.
that grief that response to that loss will always be a part of your life. But somehow you have used all of that to create in yourself this gentleness, this awareness, this hope of being a certain kind of human that just calls out all of our the best in all of us. And I wonder, when you look at this trauma, how do you think that it shaped you into the person you are today?
Oof, yeah, it's a great question, of course, and I don't know that I can say with certainty. Do you know what I mean? It's hard to know, had that not happened in my life, where I would be today and what I would be doing today.
It's
What I can
working on
say
a
with
working on an assembly line in Detroit somewhere.
who
Just
knows, you know what I mean? It's like it's what I feel I can say confidently is that the the sadness that that loss uh, created and brought up in my life has made me a profoundly more compassionate person.
wow.
And I feel like that is a great gift
Yes.
from loss. That's a great gift of sadness. If we're really willing to be present in our sadness and to sit in it and to feel the pain of it, we are able to show up for others in a different way. We might not feel as compelled to nudge them through their pain or say
Yes.
it's okay, everything's okay, and you know what I mean.
Totally.
We might be able to just be present in it, and sadness is a breeding ground for compassion, so that's a gift of that. um I don't know, honestly, beyond that. I can't say that losing my parents is what has made me a person who is like making tons of noise for love out there in the world. Maybe, you know, I know that losing my parents forced me to become independent in a way that most 14-year-olds aren't, I think,
Mm.
and perhaps made, and also I'll tell you what it brought up for me was really feeling like an outsider in the world. Being an orphan at that age in a suburban Detroit community where no one else was having that lived experience, no one I knew. I felt like a freak,
Mm.
and coupled with the fact that at the same time I was coming into my sexuality as a gay kid, which helped me. I felt like a freak. So, and I think that when you feel that and you're experiencing that as a young kid and going through that, it's likely to make you more compassionate, more empathetic for others who maybe feel like an outsider, or
Yes.
for others who feel like they're not being seen. I think that's a gift that people of the LGBTQ community naturally have, because you grow up in some way feeling like you don't belong.
Wow.
And that's like the best case scenario
Yes.
for it. The worst case is much darker. So you're likely, I'll speak for myself. Have more compassion for people who feel that way. And the truth is, Dave, most people feel that way.
Yes.
Most people feel like they don't belong, and or that they're not living in their truth in order to belong, which is equally as painful. You know
Yes.
what I'm saying? Like, they're compromising everything that's real inside of themselves in order to have some manufactured sense of belonging, instead of being honest with who they are in the world. And
Yes.
I'm not just speaking for the queer community. I'm speaking for all people. We are
No, of
so
course.
afraid to be who we are and to say, this is who I am, this is my truth.
Yes.
Receive it or don't.
So
But at
often.
least,
Yeah.
yeah, at least from that place of honesty, we can make choices that are going to align with what's real for us. And whenever we're doing that, we have a chance to create something beautiful in our lives,
Wow.
right? And so, to connect it to grief, it's like in my 20s, what I came to recognize was that my unwillingness to be to allow for the grief of losing my parents, and I created such a secret around it. I so didn't want people to know about my parents because they would be so overwhelmed, and it was completely uncomfortable for me, and the self-pity I would feel from them I couldn't stand. So I created this big secret around it and never talked about it. And what I understood is that by locking away my truth and my grief in that way, I had put up walls to real relationships with people.
Yes.
That is a very like signature aspect of who I am to know about me. And if you don't know that about me, if I've put a wall up to that truth, it's like there's a lot you can't really get to with me, you know? And so at that point in my life, it's like it's time to grieve, and it's time to just be honest with this part of your life experience and open the door to deeper connections with people in your life by doing so.
Yes. Wow. Uh, You learned a secret, whether it was in you as a as part of your personality or whatever, but you moved towards your sadness. You moved towards your loss. You moved towards that broken place. I mean, it took a long time, obviously,
Yeah.
but there's a part of you that you've learned to sit with that sadness. And so many people move against their truth. They continue to hide it, continue to feel shame about it, continue to lock it away. All of those things. What was there a singular key? Was there a singular idea that helped you bridge over to where you felt like I can now begin to move towards that sadness?
You know, I think it was just beginning to understand that it wouldn't kill me.
Hmm.
You know, it was like I think some part of me believed that I couldn't handle the if I allowed myself to really feel the loss of my parents, I wouldn't be able to handle it. I wouldn't
Yes.
be able to survive it. And I had a period when a big shift came for me when I was like 22, I think, when I that yearly cry that I mentioned earlier was lasting for days. I'm
Hmm.
like 3 days into nonstop crying and thinking I'm losing my mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't this isn't okay. And I literally pulled out a phone book, the yellow pages, which we had then in the 90s, and called, like, flipped it over, open to therapists, and closed my eyes and pointed my finger down and called the woman that I pointed to. And I had 6 sessions of therapy at the time, which was all I could afford, and talked and cried and raged. And it was all about my parents and
Wow.
family. And I think I was able to see from that the gift of that was like you can talk about this, you can be with this pain, you can cry about this, you can rage, and it's not going to kill you,
Yes.
it's not
So
going to
that's
take you
such an
down.
important point. I have a dear friend, Dr. Bruce Sanguin, and we were talking about this one day, and he said, when we were children, and things like your parents happened, or whatever it was, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's the loss, whatever it might be, there's a message that comes to us. You cannot handle this. And it's quite
Mm,
possibly true when we're 4 or 8 or 12 or whatever it might be. It's really possibly our truth at that point in time. We do not have the skills. Whatever we need to deal with this, we don't have.
mhm, mhm.
But that's no longer our truth when we're 22 or 25 or 30. And if we
Yeah.
continue to believe the lie that I don't have the skills to deal with this, then we keep it locked away. For you, I mean, your breakdown was a fortunate crossroads for you to like, wait a second, I can deal with this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to that, Dave, is that it's not comfortable. People don't want to
True,
sit in uncomfortable experiences. They
true.
don't want to deal with their pain because it hurts.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
That's the nature of pain, right? And you know, for me, everything I'm saying too is it's a lifelong process.
Yes,
I don't
exactly.
pretend to
Thank you.
have mastered
Yes.
anything.
Yeah.
You know, there are plenty of times, even today, I'm 49 years old and I've done a lot of work on myself and growth, and I lead workshops on it, and I still numb sometimes.
Yeah,
You know what I
totally.
mean? And
Totally.
it's and that's part of this experience. But what I've learned is that when we're numbing, when that's all we're doing, whether it's through drugs or alcohol or shopping or food or sex or TV or whatever it is we're doing to avoid being present with what we're actually feeling, we're giving our energy over to that thing
Yes.
anyway. Because all the energy I'm putting into running, what am I running from? I'm running from what it is I don't want to be feeling,
Yes.
instead of sitting in it and feeling it and allowing it to move through me, which is how feelings, emotions do work, actually. If we
Yes.
allow them to, they don't have an opportunity to move through us, if we're not allowing them to even come up,
True.
right?
And
And
I think that what people fail to understand is, if we're not willing to sit with our sadness, if we're not willing to sit with our pain, if we're not willing to sit with the broken places, then we also rob ourselves of the experience of joy. Because when you numb out, when you take the equalizer of your emotions and you just start, bringing down the different bandwidths of your life, not only do you not experience the fullness of your sadness or the fullness of your pain, you can't experience the fullness of your joy either,
yeah.
because you've tamped down everything in your life.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's if you put up a wall, you're putting up a wall to everything.
Yes.
You can't, in my experience, you can't really be selective. You can't just decide, as you're saying, I'm going to put up a wall to pain without also putting up a wall to pleasure.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I
Totally.
agree with my experience in life too. And the beauty of that is, it's like when you start to let those walls come crumbling down and to feel, yes, you're going to feel sadness in a deeper way and anger and everything, because when you open yourself up to feeling for real, you are going to you're going to see a lot of areas and about yourself that it's like, I don't really want to look at that, that's
Yeah.
gross.
I
But it's
really don't want to look at this.
but part of that for me, the reason I feel like I'm able to look at myself more honestly than ever is because I understand the power of love.
Yes.
And I understand that when I bring that honesty, if I can also bring love instead of shame and judgment and
Yes.
all the things that we naturally bring with our ego minds and we're conditioned to bring, if I can bring that love, it's going to be okay. I can face my envy. I can
Wow.
look at it. I can recognize it's disgusting and it's not a part of my personality I'm a fan of. And I can still shine love on it and recognize that all human beings are envious. All human minds are. We're all
Yes.
jealous. We're all blameful. We're all everything, and love reminds me it's okay. You are still worthy.
Yes.
You are still divine. You are still beautiful. It's okay. Instead of the alternative, which is what most of us live most of the time, which is, you're a piece of crap.
Yes.
You're worth nothing. You're ugly. You're stupid. You know what I mean? This is what our minds tell us, and our minds go there so naturally, it takes no effort, which is why we have to work if we want to live peacefully and with love, because the work is in listening to our minds and then going to our hearts and reminding ourselves that we are loving and lovable and all these things that don't come as naturally to the mental process.
Wow. Wow. Um, so I'm going to ask you to do something. I want
Okay.
you to read a quote from your book. It starts on page
Okay.
21.
Okay.
I was interviewed for the Home podcast recently. So if you'd start there and take us down to that freedom alone makes feeling the pain worth it. If you just read that section for us.
Okay. I was interviewed for the Home podcast recently, and one of the hosts asked me if it was still difficult to talk about what happened to my parents all these years later. I told her, usually no, but sometimes yes. It depends on the context of the conversation and how I'm feeling right then. Even today, at times, more than 30 years later, I'm heavy with grief over the fact that they're gone and the way they died. I mourn for the brutality of their deaths and the fear they must have felt in those final moments. I mourn for the relationship I never got to have with them as a teenager and adult, and for everything they never got to experience with me. I mourn being an orphan. I mourn the unfairness of it all. What's so much different now that I'm older is that I allow the grief to enter and stay as long as it needs, even when it's darkening my mind and ripping at my heart, even when the pain of it scares me. I don't pretend I'm not feeling it, and usually, but not always, don't distract myself to keep from taking in its fullness. Eventually, it moves through me. That's how emotions are designed. They let go of us when we stop holding on to them. And I don't live my life anymore as though I'm keeping a big secret or running from a deeper truth. I'm no longer ashamed of my past. That freedom alone makes feeling the pain worth it. Do you want me to keep going? Or?
Wow, you could read the rest of the book if it was up to me. You could just keep going. I'm like, and now, ladies and gentlemen, Scott Stabile reads Big Love.
You're too kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit. I want to bridge you over to talking about fear, which is why I wanted you to read that, because a little later down you make this statement: we all have our reasons for burying our pain, but at the core it comes down to fear. And for me, fear is so related to grief, because loss of any kind creates so many unknowns and unpredictables. If I lose my job, there's all these unknowns. If I lose this relationship, there's all these unknowns. If I lose someone I love, there's all these unknowns. And you just have this amazing chapter. It was one of the things that was so healing for me. I was like, you have this amazing chapter where you write about letting your fear write you a letter. And you talk about the process of acknowledging the fears in your life and how you learned to move forward. And this letting your fear write you a letter was a really big part of that. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. That's an exercise from Elizabeth Gilbert, and who's an extraordinary author and activist and human. And I went to an all-day kind of workshop with her and this man named Rob Bell, and she invited us to write a letter to ourselves from our fear, and to allow our fear to express itself, why it was doing what it's doing, like what purpose it was serving in our lives. And it was a really powerful exercise for me, because we're so used to being at war with our fear, and we're so used to seeing our fear as this tyrant who prevents us from doing what it is we want to do, prevents us from following our heart, because we're always afraid of being judged or failing, or a whole host of other fears. But when I allowed my fear to speak to me, what my fear said to me was that it was just trying to protect me. It didn't want me to get hurt. It didn't want me to be judged. It didn't want me to be failed or to fail. And what was great about that exercise is what it allowed me to do was to open up to creating a different relationship with my fear, a relationship of friendship instead of one of animosity and adversity or adversarial. So when you engage with any part of yourself through the lens of friendship, it's automatically going to change how you engage in your life, right? So my fear, which used to be this like bullying tyrant with its boot on my neck, suddenly became like a little brother who was always tugging at my pant leg, like, hey, don't do that, it's going to hurt you. Hey, don't do that, you're going to fail. And the conversation and the energy exchange you can have with a little brother who's doing that is very different than when it's this scary figure doing that, right? And when I changed my relationship energetically with fear, it changed how I was dealing with fear in my life in general. And I felt like Elizabeth Gilbert, I'll bring her up again. Actually, Dave, before we went live, you brought up the book Big Magic. And in her book, Big Magic, she has a chapter on the relationship between fear and creativity, because those things go hand in hand, especially if you're inclined to share your creativity in any way. And what Liz writes in that chapter is, she says before she starts a new writing project, she always has a conversation with her fear. And she says to her fear, listen, I know you're just doing your job. I know you're just here to protect me. You're looking out for me. And you're coming along for the ride because you always do. So you can come along for the ride, but you're in the back seat. And under no circumstance do you get to hold the wheel of this car. Under no circumstance do you get to drive, right? And I think that's a really helpful way to reflect on our fear, is that most of us are being driven by it. For most of us, our fear is in the driver's seat and we're in the back seat, scared like crazy about the ride we're going to go on. And so we usually stop ourselves from even going on the ride. We stop ourselves from making the change we know we need to make. We stop ourselves from leaving the relationship that's no good for us, or from leaving the job that's no good for us, or for trying new things, a whole host of things, right? But then we can remember that, fear is a part of this human experience. It's always going to be with us. It's always going to say no to any change that we want to make, because it's trying to protect us and it doesn't want to get hurt. And whenever we're making changes, it's going to be uncomfortable. Our fear doesn't want us to be uncomfortable. So understand that your fear is programmed to say no all the time, which means that it's not really that emotionally intelligent. If its only answer is no, then it's incumbent upon us to bring our own emotional intelligence to each situation and really reflect on, is this move actually going to kill me the way my fear wants to suggest? Or is this choice actually going to have everybody on the planet hating me and judging me as my fear would suggest? And what you come to find is usually the answer to those things is no. And that's one of the things that has helped me to move forward more. And the more you move forward and you make brave choices and you take action, the less power your fear has over you, because your fear starts to understand that it's not in the driver's seat, that it doesn't have the final say in this choice. And it doesn't mean it disappears. It's always there. I've done, I don't know how many dozens, hundreds of these kinds of conversations with people on podcasts or on Facebook, and I'm always nervous before it begins. There's always that fear of being judged, or fear of being misunderstood, or saying the wrong thing, right? And you just keep moving forward, and your fear comes along with you, but it stops defining you. It stops dictating the choices that you make. That's been my experience with it.
Yes, so totally. I loved Liz Gilbert's thing about fear. Yeah. She made me chuckle when she said, and just so you know, you can't even touch the radio. You're not allowed to do anything.
Totally. It's great.
It is great.
And I really encourage people to get in conversation with all aspects of themselves. It's like, sometimes we're feeling so anxious and we don't know why, and we're just moving through the world day in and day out in this anxiety. Get in conversation with your anxiety. Write a letter to your anxiety. Invite your anxiety to write a letter back to you. It's like we are controlled by things that we don't need to be controlled by, and that we're less likely to be controlled by once we actually step into the energy field that they're creating and be like, what's going on for me here? What's happening right now? What are you trying to show me with this anxiety? What do I have to learn from this? Right? And at the very least, it shifts the energy. It tweaks the energy, and maybe creates for you a different conversation to have.
I think there's a brilliant saying that comes out of the AA world that says we are as sick as our secrets. So anything that we can't shine light on, anything that we can't, in this, have a conversation with, be honest with, have a conversation with us, take out of the dark places, the closeted places of our life. Anything that we can't bring out is where our brokenness resides. And the moment we can have those kind of conversations, everything changes.
Yeah, and what's so powerful about that is it doesn't just change for you. Like when you can show up with the courage to be present with your secrets and to start sharing them, like moving beyond your shame, because it's shame ultimately that prevents us from, sharing our secrets with the world. You also, you open a door for others to be present in their courage and to share their secrets as well. And then that chain reaction, what it creates in our world, I mean, we saw it in a very big and visible way with the Me Too movement, what that's created by, a handful of women in the beginning who were willing to stand in their shame and voice their experience. And it created this amazing avalanche
Totally.
of others. This type of stuff is contagious. It's like when you're living in love, that's contagious. When you're living in the courage to share transcend your shame, that's contagious. What you're doing here by opening up conversations for grief and grace, this is contagious. This, I
Yes.
believe, is how we ultimately create healing in our world.
Totally. Wow. Wow. All right. Um, One last question for you. I always try to. I could just talk with you all night. I mean,
Yeah,
just
sure.
like it's just ridiculously cool conversation.
Thank you.
Uh, but I always try to close our live with some variation of this question, some variation of the "what one thing" question. So for you, let me ask you this: what for you has become the most important insight into overcoming grief and fear and learning to live in the power of a wide open heart? I love that phrase, the power of a wide open heart.
Yeah. Well, I would say get rid of the word overcoming for me,
Mm,
and go back to integrating, because if I put pressure on myself to overcome fear, it doesn't happen.
mm,
I'm fearful all the time. So it's like, how can I just create intentionally a different relationship with the aspects of being human that are less comfortable than joy and happiness and celebration, aspects like grief and fear. Um, and for me, it all comes back to love. And let me say, what I'll say is, first and foremost, it comes back to self love.
yes,
Because what I've come to understand is that when I am showing up for myself in a loving place, when I am dedicated with everything I have to loving myself, no matter what, it impacts all of the choices I make in my life. It impacts all of the relationships I have in my life, and it naturally impacts the world. Right? So if you're asking me, like, for a nugget of advice to give people, it's like, love yourself with abandon.
wow,
Like make that first and foremost your commitment, and don't stop at this place, because your mind is going to tell you, but that's selfish. Yes, of course it's selfish. It's the most beautiful selfishness we have to work with on this planet, because it's the kind of selfishness that serves everybody.
yes,
Right? When you love yourself and take care of yourself, you are going to show up wholly differently in your life. And our world needs people who are showing up from a place of self-love.
yes,
And that changes everything. It changes our relationship to fear, to grief, to humanity, to blame, to all of it. It naturally does. The Buddha has one of my favorite quotes, which is, if you truly loved yourself, you could never hurt another.
mm,
And that's the essence of self-love. It's understanding that in that energy lives absolute love for everyone else.
yes,
So that, and you are, I feel, when I'm in that place, which is more often than ever, but not even close to all the time. But when I'm in that place and moving through that world connected to that energy of love, I feel powerful beyond measure. I feel untouchable. And I also feel like what I'm offering is beautiful and pure.
wow, wow, amazing.
And I feel that way for everybody. It's not just
Yes,
me. It's, everyone.
wow. The book is Big Love, The Power of Living with a Wide Open Heart. Um, I love Glennon's comment on there. She said, Scott Stabile is one of my favorite love artists and activists.
Yeah.
His voice in this vital new book is fresh and relevant. I think that's a cool way of being referred to, a love artist and an activist.
Well, yeah. And love activist. I've taken on that title. I've put that in things after she wrote that. I love it. Because people are always like, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't, you know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
know. And so I'm like, I'm a love activist.
Yeah, that is so
Which
cool.
then it's like, what does that mean? But I'm like, I like putting that out there. I
There
make
you
noise
go.
for love, baby. That's like my main mission.
There you go. So Michelle, I see one of this comment just popped up. It said, "Please tell me that Scott's writing another book." So,
What the
um,
show. Uh,
yeah,
I was. Dave and I were talking about that beforehand. I was working on another book, and when the pandemic hit, I had no interest in what had been working on. After writing many chapters for it, it was a memoir about my journey through sexuality. So yeah, I'm not working on anything specific right now, but I feel confident there's another book in there or two at some point. We'll see.
yes, I think so too.
But
Tell us a little bit about. Hey, Aaron, thank you. Aaron O'Brien says you're the best. So,
hi, Aaron O'Brien. So are you?
um, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. You did a seminar yesterday. You're going to do more of those. How do people find
Yeah.
out about that and get involved with that?
Yeah, you can check out. I mean, if you're on Instagram, find me there. If you're on Facebook, you can find me there. And I have a website, scottstabile.com. The thing, yeah, I'm starting to. Yesterday was the first step back into doing retreats, but this is an online one. It's a 4-week online retreat that's really beautiful. It's called Intention and Connection. So I'm going to do a lot more of these online things. I've resisted it only because who knows why, any
There you
number
go.
of reasons, but I'm there now. I feel like I extracted myself a bit, and I feel much more present now again, back on social media, present and making noise for love again, and compassion and empathy at a time where
Yes.
it's really difficult to find a lot of empathy out there when we need it the most. So I'll be announcing all my things through the regular social media channels as they
Cool.
come up.
Yeah, and I really do encourage people if they, like you said, Instagram or Facebook, just follow you. You have daily nuggets that you put up there. And the retreats are by registration, so this one's closed. Is that
Yeah, because it began yesterday,
okay?
so
All
we've
right.
got the
So,
group for
but
this
if
one.
people watch, you'll have more of those coming up.
Oh, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure, for sure.
especially as Santa Fe gets colder than anything you've experienced in Detroit, and you're like, I think I'll just stay indoors and do a retreat with people right now.
I don't think you know Detroit well. Santa Fe's not going to get colder than anything I've experienced in Detroit. I'm fairly confident about that.
That's so funny. All right, thank you, Scott. Thank you for everything that you shared tonight. It's
Oh,
yeah,
pleasure.
the
Thank you, brother. I
wonder
really.
the wonder of having a conversation with you is that it just bubbles from your heart. It's just this reality that you're not sort of spouting platitudes, but there's just a wonder of the way that that life and the hard work that you've done has shaped you into a human being that has had a profound impact on my life and a profound impact on the lives of so many. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you, brother. Really,
Yeah.
I'm really touched by that. Thank you so much, and
Yeah.
thanks for having me on your beautiful show.
Yeah. So don't be surprised if I call you in a couple months and go, Scott, come on back on. Let's talk some
Yeah,
more.
it'll take a year, so you may as well start next month.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. I love you, my friend.
Love you too, brother. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dave.
Bye now.
Bye bye.
Yeah. So I hope that this has been a help even after this live is over. You can still leave comments or questions, and I'll be coming back to review the comments and interact with you as we go forward. And don't forget to click on live notifications so that you can get a reminder whenever it is we're going live. Go over to scottstabile.com, check out the website, and you can buy Big Love there on the website, or go to Amazon. You can buy it there. Honestly, as I said at the beginning, I'm on my 4th or 5th reading of this. I pull it out and go through and go through again all the underlined parts, and it just never ceases to call my heart to a bigger and bigger place. If you've gotten value out of this tonight, as I know you have, thank you for the comments that I see popping up. If you've gotten value out of this tonight, please feel free to share it on all of your social media platforms. And again, leave a comment below and give us a like, and connect us to people that you think could use all of this. So thank you. Thank you for being a part of tonight. Stay safe. Thanksgiving is coming up. Wear a mask. Stay away from people. and yeah, let's get through this pandemic together. All right. Peace and love from my heart to yours.